Welcome back, everybody, to this episode of the Open Concept Podcast, where we are breaking down unnecessary walls and barriers that stand in the way of greatness. And that's your favor if you've enjoyed what you've been listening to date. Really appreciate if you go down, subscribe, leave a review. That would be amazing. Building. I call myself a builder. That's what I do. People ask me what I do. I say, I'm a builder. It sounds so simple, doesn't it? We build things. We construct. We create. But true building, the kind that lasts, the kind that matters, is never just about adding. It's about knowing what to tear down first. Look at any construction site. I work in construction, and before a new house goes up, or before a new skyscraper rises, what do you see? Demolition, excavation, removal. The old must be cleared out of the way before the new foundation can be built and poured. This isn't just true in construction. It's the fundamental principle of all meaningful growth and progress. When I talk about building a strong foundation, I'm not talking about just digging down enough so that it's okay. I'm talking about getting to bedrock, going deep, not settling for loose soil or sand that's going to shift under pressure. Getting down to something that will hold when the storms come, because the storms will come. The ancient Romans understood this. They built structures that have stood for 2,000 years because they were obsessed about foundations. The Colosseum stands on a ring of concrete. It's like 12 feet thick. The Pantheon's foundation extends deep below the visible structure. And they knew that what you can't see determines whether what you can see will stand or fall. But here's what most people miss. Finding that bedrock often means digging through layers of what came before. It means removing, not just adding. It means having the courage to tear down what isn't working. And that can be a very scary thing to do. In 1666, I clearly wasn't around, but I did learn a little bit about it in history in high school. I liked history when I was in high school. We talked about the Great Fire of London that destroyed over 13,000 houses, almost 100 churches, and most of the buildings that belonged to the city authorities. And it was devastating, catastrophic. But from those ashes rose a London rebuilt with wider streets, brick buildings instead of timber, and the first comprehensive building regulations in history. Christopher Wren, one of my favorite architects, one of his masterpieces was St. Paul's Cathedral. And it stands as a testament of what can emerge when we're forced to start again. The destruction created the opportunity for something much greater. And that's been a pattern throughout history, right? The most profound building often happens after the most complete destruction. After World War II, Japan lay in ruins. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were obliterated. Tokyo was absolutely firebombed and their military defeated, their economy shattered, their imperial system totally dismantled. Everything they had built was torn down. And what happened? They rebuilt. Not just buildings and infrastructure, but their entire society. And I know there was a lot of deaths, and I'm not saying that in order to destroy things, you need to go out and start a war and kill people. That's obviously not where I'm going with this. But the lesson here remains the same. They transformed from a militaristic empire to a democratic industrial powerhouse. And the Japan that emerged was unrecognizable from what came before, and it became one of the most prosperous nations on earth. And building means having the discipline to strip away what doesn't work, what doesn't serve, what holds you back. I've referred to Bruce Lee in this podcast before because Bruce Lee is a hero of mine. And studying him, when he went around and studied all of the martial arts that he could find, he found, everything from boxing, wrestling, Muay Thai, Jiu-Jitsu. He went around and tested out every single martial art, and he stripped away all the bullshit, everything out of those martial arts that he found wouldn't actually work in a street fight, and kept what was necessary and created a martial art known as Jeet Kune Do. If you're interested in more Bruce Lee, check out, I think it was episode 4 or 5. Talk a little bit about Bruce Lee, so shout out to the GOAT. When I train, I break down muscle fiber, right? You go into the gym, you tear things, you damage it, you tear that muscle fiber. And that's not destruction just for destruction's sake. It's necessary for growth. The muscle rebuilds stronger than before, but not only if you first have the courage to walk through that door and start breaking that shit down. The principle applies everywhere, in business, relationships, society, in your own life. Look at Berlin after the wall fell in 1989. Here we go with history again. I think it was November 1989. For decades, a concrete barrier had physically divided the city, but the real divisions ran deeper, right? Different economic systems, different political ideologies, different ways of life. When that wall came down, that's when the real work began. Reunification meant dismantling entire systems that had defined people's lives for generations. East German industries that couldn't compete in a market totally collapsed. Social structures dissolved, and it was painful. Obviously, I don't remember much of it. I was still very much a kid, but I do remember the stories and what happened afterwards. Many lost their livelihoods and their sense of identity, I'm sure. But from that dismantling emerged a new Berlin, right? New capital of Germany. Now one of the most vibrant, creative, and economically powerful cities in Europe. The rebuilding wasn't just physical, psychological, cultural, economical. The Germany that exists today could not have emerged without the courage to first tear down what no longer served its people. Building wider, right? We're talking about building wider, expanding your reach, your impact, your capabilities means first removing the limitations that you've placed on yourself. Building taller, reaching higher, achieving more means first clearing away the low ceiling of your own expectations. One of my current business coaches, Dan Martell, talks about making the old ceiling your new floor. When you hit a new height, that becomes your new benchmark. Whether it's new revenue targets or whether it's new health, new personal bests, new chin-up best that you've done at the gym, whatever it is, like whatever becomes that new, what was the old ceiling has now become the new floor. Right? We move forward, and true progress means having the courage to leave behind what's holding you back. When I work with teams, the first question I ask is what needs to be demolished? What processes, what habits, what assumptions are standing in the way of what could be built? And most people are uncomfortable with this question because they don't want to look at it closely. They don't want to add without subtracting. They want to build without clearing the ground. And it just doesn't work. When the 2008 financial crisis hit, it shattered the global economy for many. Millions lost their homes, their jobs, their savings, banks collapsed, markets plummeted. The system many had trusted absolutely imploded. I remember I was working on a construction site, and this was 2008, and I had just gone out. I was working with another surveyor. I was doing some surveying as an apprentice. Both of us needed new vehicles. We came to work one day. I had gone out and I had bought a new vehicle. I had spent about $2,500 on this old, shitty, broken down Pathfinder. And he had bought a brand new Subaru. It was like 40 grand at the time. He was pumped on it. We were talking about it. And that day he was laughing at me. He was like, you know what? One of these days you're going to have to grow up and buy yourself a big boy car. That same day, our foreman walked up to us and told us that we were shutting the construction site down. We're about to start building a hotel on top of a parkade. And all of the fly forms that we had sent, all of the material that we had purchased that we were working on, getting ready to build this hotel, was being sent back. This was in 2008. He was let go. The surveyor that I was working with was let go of his job that same day. I stayed on working for another couple of years, but it taught me that I didn't want to over leverage myself. And in 2008, I remember how this affected people very, very clearly. It was devastating, but what emerged? New financial regulations, the rise of fintech that democratized investing, a generation of entrepreneurs who built the gig economy and remote work revolution, a complete reimagining of what careers and financial security even meant. The destruction created space for innovation that would have been impossible in the old system. And look what happened after COVID, right? We all remember this little COVID-19 thing. Global lockdowns, supply chains shattered. Still, death toll, TBD. That's maybe a conversation for another time. But there's no doubt that entire industries weren't decimated overnight. But what followed? A complete revolution in remote work, healthcare innovation at unprecedented speed. Probably too fast. Some people might even argue that there was a little too much speed, but it was something that nobody thought was going to be possible before. Digital transformation that would have taken a decade compressed into months. Months. Communities finding new ways to connect. Companies reinventing their entire business models. The destruction forced adaptations that years of incremental change had failed to produce. Think about the tech disruptions you've witnessed in your lifetime, or certainly in my lifetime anyways. I remember when I was a kid, one of the most fun things to do on a Friday night was my mom, my dad, or I would go with a friend, and we'd go to this little store called Blockbuster. I'm sure some of you have heard of it. And it was great. You walk in, you go, you rent a couple of movies, VHS tape, maybe a DVD. But I remember the VHS tapes, and you had to go in and you bought 2 movies, or you rented a couple of movies, you brought them home, you watched them, you had to rewind them. Otherwise, you would get hit with a late fee. So you had to make sure you rewound it. And you go and you drop it off in a box, drive it back to the store, drop it off, it would get checked in. That's just how we thought things were. But you know what? The old model didn't work. Blockbuster collapsed, and Netflix and other OTT options emerged. Taxi systems were upended by rideshare apps. Traditional retail crumbled as e-commerce rose and is still continuing to rise to this day. The music industry was torn apart by digital streaming. Shout out Napster. I'm sure some of you, if we're going back a few decades, remember Napster. In each case, something had to be dismantled before something better could be built. The pattern repeats consistently. The dot-com bubble burst, clearing the way for the Web 2. Social media platforms rose and fell as user needs evolved. Cryptocurrency, right? If you've ever been involved in crypto, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Doge, Trump coin, whatever that is, I don't know what's out there these days, but it's emerged to challenge traditional banking systems. But historical examples only tell part of the story. This principle operates in your life every single day. That relationship that's holding you back, you have to be willing to let it go before you can build something better. The business strategy that no longer is working, you have to dismantle it before you can implement something more effective. That habit that's undermining your health, those vices, you have to tear them down before you can build a stronger body. And that limiting belief about what you're capable of, you have to destroy it before you can build the life you're meant to live. Building isn't comfortable. Real building, the kind that lasts, requires the courage to destroy first. Look at any forest after wildfire. Absolutely devastating, yes. But what follows? New growth. Certain pine species actually require fire to release their seeds. The forest that emerges is often much healthier than what came before. Nature understands what we often forget. Destruction is part of creation. When I talk about stripping out parts that no longer serve a purpose, I'm talking about being ruthless with what doesn't contribute to your mission. The ancient Greeks had a concept. Maybe you've heard of it. It's called catharsis. Purification through the removal of excess. Aristotle applied it to drama, the purging of emotions through tragedy. But it applies to everywhere in life. Sometimes the most important building work you can possibly do is removing what is unnecessary, what's holding you back, what's clouding your purpose. The sculptor Michelangelo, he once said, and I'm probably going to paraphrase this a little bit, but he said, I saw the angel in the marble and carved it until I set him free. I saw the angel in the marble and I carved it until I set him free. He didn't build the angel by adding marble. He revealed it by removing everything around it that wasn't the angel. If your life's like marble, your team is like marble, your business is like marble, I'd like you to think of that. Because building often means carving away everything that isn't contributing to what you're trying to create. In 16th century Europe, the Protestant Reformation tore down centuries of religious hierarchy and practice. It was divisive, violent, disruptive. But it cleared the ground for new religious understanding, new political structures, new social organizations that shaped the modern world. Some of you may have heard of Microsoft. When Satya Nadella became CEO of Microsoft in 2014, the company was struggling, really struggling to stay relevant. New competition was fierce. And for a company that was once very much on top of the computer space, software space, it was struggling. Their stock was stagnant. They were losing the mobile war, right? Cloud computing was passing them by. Nadella's first move tore down the competitive, siloed culture that had defined Microsoft for decades. He dismantled the stack ranking system that had pitted employees against each other, and he destroyed the know-it-all mentality and rebuilt it around learn it all. Quote, unquote, learn it all. Very big difference between the know-it-all mentality and the learn-it-all mentality. Know-it-all means we know it all. There's no room for growth. Learn-it-all, which I really love, means that we are open to consistently learning in perpetuity. Even put Microsoft Office on iOS and Android, something that would have been unthinkable under the old regime. The transformation was so complete that Microsoft then again became one of the world's most valuable companies. And that's hard. That's a hard thing to go from a company that was at the absolute peak, right? Their absolute pinnacle moments, just doing really, really well. There's not a chance that a company like that could fail, to absolutely plummet, to rise again. And I love that story. When Steve Jobs returned to Apple in 1997, the company was like 3 months, 90 days from bankruptcy. His first move: destroy the existing product line, cut it by 70%, tear down what wasn't working. People thought that he was crazy, but from that demolition emerged a foundation that would become the world's most valuable company. The iPhone, the iPad, the MacBook, none of these would exist if Jobs hadn't first had the courage to tear down what wasn't working. And I'm recording today on a MacBook. So thank you, Steve Jobs. The transformation of Detroit after its 2013 bankruptcy represents this principle in action. I'm Canadian. I don't know a lot about US history, but I do remember a few key moments, again, going back to, just after high school, when I started watching the news. There was a few stories and few cycles of time that really stood out to me. Detroit in 2013 going bankrupt. I didn't even know what bankrupt was. But the largest municipal bankruptcy in US history forced the dismantling of unsustainable systems. And it was painful, I'm sure. But it created space for urban farming initiatives, tech startups, artistic renaissance, if you will, and community-led rebuilding that would have been impossible without the collapse of what came before. This is the pattern, right? Destruction, then creation. Tearing down, then building up. Most people want to skip the first part. It's a lot easier that way. They want creation without destruction, building without clearing. And it doesn't work. It has never worked. And it never will. Not if you want it to last. The most fundamental example is your own body. Every day, your cells are breaking down and rebuilding. Your bones are being resorbed and reformed. Your skin it's regenerating, right? It's sloughing off, it's coming off, and it's starting to regenerate. And you're constantly tearing down and rebuilding at the cellular level. When that process stops, you die. That's it. Building isn't a one-time event. It's not something you do and then it's done. It's a constant process of assessing what's working and what isn't, what needs to be maintained and what needs to be demolished, what serves your purpose and what undermines it. When I work with leaders, I tell them your job isn't just to build, it's to destroy what needs to be destroyed. Outdated procedures, toxic culture, inefficient processes, you have to be willing to tear down before you can build up. And that's the key. Building doesn't mean erasing the past. It means learning from it, honoring what works, and having the courage to discard what doesn't. Look at your life right now, internally. What needs to be torn down before you can rebuild? What foundation has cracked and needs to be rebuilt? What structure is no longer serving its purpose? What habits no longer serve you? What people in your life no longer serve you? Building a strong foundation means having the courage to excavate, to dig until you reach that bedrock. Building wider means having the discipline to remove the barriers to expansion. Building taller means having the vision to clear away the low ceilings of limited thinking. And moving forward means having the strength to leave behind what's holding you back. And sometimes, often, building means starting again from the ground up with clear eyes and absolute fucking commitment. The ancient phoenix burns completely to ash before it rises again, stronger than before. That's just not just mythology, right? That's a fundamental truth about all meaningful building. Destruction, then creation. Tearing down, then building up. This is the way, the only way, the eternal way. Are you ready to build? Then ask yourself, what needs to be torn down? The answer to that question is where true building begins. Until next time, rock and roll. Stay blessed.